Hi there. Welcome to a review of chapter 26 through 28 of APUSH history, also known as the Late Cold War. The first section that will have a red background is about the 1960s. So, foundations of the 1960s. What caused the things in the 1960s to happen? Well, here are some things. There was a baby boom, and that led to more consumerism and a rising population. So there's a new population. That also means a new culture. And a lot of people moved to the suburbs. Well, that third one. Service corporations. There was an expanding service economy. People were buying a lot of stuff now. Like I just said, suburban growth, it was helped by the baby boom and service corporations. TVs. Families are influenced. This causes some clear distinction between two groups of people, ones that wanted change and ones that wanted things to stay the same. And then there was interstates made by Eisenhower that we talked about last time, the last review video, and that caused more mobility. Foundations of the 1960s continued. Emerging segregation dissent. People were more and more I don't know, but there was more dissent towards segregation and people were taking action. And examples are Rosa Parks, boycott sit-ins, Earl Warren. Don't know why I didn't put Martin Luther King. Definitely should have put in there. And then Billy Graham and religion. To be Christian is not to be an American. So that's a new thing, and we'll talk about this more in the 1970s with the new right and moral majority. Beatniks, mostly authors, and they hate conformity. They hate conformity, people just being all the same. They don't like that. And the conformists, they don't like the beatniks. Expansion of the Cold War. The Cold War was expanded by the CIA's presence in Iran, brinkmanship, which was, we already talked about this, but that was sort of pressuring to the brink of war almost, actual war. And then Eisenhower Doctrine, arms, and space race. College students. Okay, so that was the foundations. Now we're talking about what actually happened in 1960. So here's what some college students did. College students, they were typically middle class. These people, not saying all college students, these activists, or yeah, there was the SNCC and SDS organizations. Tom Hayden was a major person of the SDS. He made the Port Huron Statement. And then there was a free speech movement by Mario Savio. And as you can see, protests were often ended and officers taking these people to jail. Women. What did women do in the 1960s? Well, there was Betty Friedan's feminine mystique that said housewives are unhappy. That's just general. It said a lot more too, but it explained how the housewife typical traditional ideas, that's not how it should be anymore. They also called for equal pay. Women could already vote, and they could already vote. I don't know what else I was going to say. I kind of lost it. But they were calling for equal pay. And there was a national organization for women now, as you can see in the picture. And there's men in the picture too, so men supported it. African Americans. Here are some things that some African Americans did. In 1960, Martin Luther King, he did a 1963 March on Washington. There's been a lot of marches on Washington. Sorry. And then Rosa Parks, she refused to sit in the back of a bus, and that led to a lot of boycotts. And then Carmichael was a major person at the time, and Newton and Seal, these were two Black Panthers, which were, as you can see in the picture, militarized, and they would march around, and this shows that there's a lot of new resistance and new ideas being brought to the table. Environment. It was not really emphasized since Theodore Roosevelt, but it is again by Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which explains environmental issues like from pesticides. Poverty. Mike Harrington made a book called The Other America that explained poverty in the United States, and it brought a lot of attention to the issues. Okay, now the new frontier. What is the new frontier? The new frontier is what JFK, his plan. And a lot of Republicans and Southern Democrats, not South Democrats, sorry, did not like him, and that's to be expected. But here's some things he was involved in. He was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which it was found that missiles were pointed at Florida, made by Khrushchev, don't know how to say that, and Fidel Castro. And then Berlin crisis, Germany got made into West and East Germany. And then Vietnam, flexible response. This meant that he wanted to be strategic to find a solution, not just, oh, random, let's just do whatever we want. He was trying to be more strategic about it. And he passed away in 1963 because he was assassinated. That's not good. But then Lyndon Johnson became president. And so JFK's plan was the New Frontier. His was called the Great Society. He was president after Kennedy, comes with the 25th Amendment later on, which the 25th Amendment says that if something happens, like a president being assassinated, the vice president can take over, and that's what happened. Johnson tried to fix the issues, the poverty issues, and he expanded Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, VISTA, and ESA, school acts to improve school for those who can't afford it. So a question arises, why was Johnson more successful than Kennedy? This was due to his long history of politics, and he understood poverty from a childhood experience. This is an example response. Very brief though. Vietnam controversy. So Johnson lost a lot of support after these things. Gulf of Tonkin. At the Gulf of Tonkin, a U.S. ship was sunk. President Johnson decided to make a law to increase his military power, and that made him put a lot of more troops in there, and he had to fight against those soldiers had to fight against the Viet Cong, which they were rebels in the South, and then obviously the North Vietnamese, which was the enemy. Living room wars. This refers to the TVs showing different things than what Johnson says. So whereas Lyndon Johnson might have said that things are going okay, TV might show that it's not. And then there's hawks versus doves. Hawks were people that wanted war. Doves were people that did not. Tet offensive attack. This was a major casualty attack for the US, which it was unexpected because of Tet, but the United States did win, but it ended Johnson's military involvement because after they saw the casualties, they were like, too bad, Johnson can't do that anymore. Okay, that was the 1960s. Now, what happened in the 1970s? Yellow background. Okay, so after Lyndon Johnson, then there was Richard Nixon and then Gerald Ford, but let's talk about, we're pretty much talking about Nixon right now. So, domestic problems, recession and stagflation. There was no GDP growth and there was high inflation, which means prices of things increased. Nixon tried tax cuts and deficit spending, but he was not successful. This made many mad. What about environment issues? Carson's Silent Spring brought attention, as we already said, and the results were EPA, Environmental Protection Act, or agency, and then Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act, and the creation of the holiday of Earth Day. This is what Nixon did. What about energy crisis? Causes. This was due to automobile consumption increases and OPEC embargo, which we'll talk about why that happened later on. The results of this energy crisis were the 55 miles per hour law being made for interstates, the Alaskan pipeline opened up, and the United States tried to become more independent instead of dependent on other countries because the embargo caused the United States to not get a major oil source. And so they were like, well, let's try to have things within our own country, our own resources, so that doesn't happen. Expansions of agencies, things like OSHA and workforce protection agencies were created. So Nixon was very reform-based. Civil rights. Affirmative action was declared constitutional. And then there was the Philadelphia Plan of 1969 that put this into act by making racial quotas. So that means a certain amount of people of different races have to be hired. Title IX, women must be equally funded and educationally funded services. So keep in mind that Richard Nixon was a Republican, but he was very progressive in his ideas, if you want to call it. Okay, now that was domestic things, so in the country. Now out of the country, internationally. What happened with Vietnam? Nixon made a plan called Vietnamization. I'm saying that right, which was the de-escalation, which meant let's just take out let's take out the troops, de-escalate the war instead of escalate like other presidents before did. And he tried to turn over the war to the South Vietnamese, like, okay, take over. And then Nixon doctrine, this was something that said countries should fight their own wars because it was becoming clear that involving ourselves in other wars wasn't always a good thing. Cambodia was bombed, and it was a secret bombing that no one knew about. And then when they did, there was a Kent State University protest, which was in Ohio, Kent State University. And then in 1975, South Vietnam fell to communism and it united as Vietnam. And so technically, this would be one of the few wars that the United States ever lost, but it was sort of due to giving it away to other people. And keep this in mind, because this, when we get to the 1980s part, this is the reason for a lot of people being mad. Is this war being lost makes the United States look weak. the sun. And then internationally, in the Middle East, what happened in the Middle East? 6-Day War in 1967. Okay, well, we're going back a little bit, but the United States supports Israel. This is to say that once again, when another war happens, Yom Kippur War, 1973, once again, the United States supports Israel. But because of this, Arab countries and OPEC started an embargo that we talked about right there, and that was not good. We already said why. What about USSR and China? Disagreements between China and USSR are taken advantage of, the taunt. And that was like trying to make peace. So Nixon visits China and makes deals. So they're like, oh, not getting along, and then they make deals with China, get on good terms with them. And we get on pretty good terms with USSR, sort of making the Cold War come to a halt temporarily. Grain deals were made with USSR, and we sold a lot of our grain to them. And that air missiles or ballistics and SALT I treaties were made to limit tension in arms. Then later on, Ford made the Helsinki Accords that recognized Soviet control of parts of Eastern Europe. This is called the New Left. How did liberalism change in the 1970s? Talk about feminism. Equal Pay Act and suffrage already exist for women. Keep that in mind. Betty Friedan's feminine mystique influences many. There was Title IX, and Roe versus Wade was a Supreme Court case that decided that abortion was legal. Connecting this to now, that might even become illegal. That Supreme Court case now in 2022 may become overturned. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, things that happen and that we're talking about, they still connect to now. ERA fails, Equal Rights Amendment fails. It was a right that was trying to be added to the let me just start over. It was an amendment that was trying to be added to the Constitution, but that did not work. It failed, and it was protested by Phyllis Schlafly. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. And she did not want this. Okay, what about Latinos? So Cesar Chavez, United Farmer Works, he organized a United Farmer Works to try to improve conditions, and many strikes occurred. Native Americans, there was an American Indian movement, AIM, and there's control of reservations. They try to get control of the reservations, and they became militant. And they took over Alcatraz, Wounded Knee. Remember, that was a old battle site from that involved Native Americans. And then there was a 1972 March on Washington. Counterculture. Counterculture had new ideas about drugs and personal life. I'll leave that at that. Yeah. Okay. Then what happened with Nixon? A lot of people liked him until Watergate. This was when Republicans broke into a Democrat hotel, and this was an effort to try to get Nixon to win the next election, which he likely would have anyways. Nixon, there was audio tapes that proved that Nixon was involved. And the vice president, Spiro Agnew, was replaced with Gerald Ford, which signaled possible corruption. And then the U.S. versus Nixon Supreme Court decision decided that he had to give the audio tapes up that he was withholding. And this made him have to resign in 1964. And that's what. Another form of corruption was in Southern strategy. This was a strategy of Nixon to try to appeal to Southerners by instructing judges to not be so fast about civil rights acts. He was trying to appeal to anyone that he could, and he used not good means to do so. Then, what about Ford? He lost a lot of his support after pardoning Nixon in his presidency, and he lost the next election. So, a question may be, was Nixon successful minus Watergate? Example answer, yes. Why? Vietnamization and detente, like that was sort of settling and easing the Cold War. EPA and Clean Air Act, they helped the environment, and then Philadelphia Act of 1969, it achieved its goals of affirmative action. And so, minus Watergate, he may be considered a successful president. Oh, that's a glitchy picture. Account for Carter's 1976 win. Well, why did Ford lose? Republican distrust from Nixon and Ford's schemes. Many may have not liked the Republican Party as much anymore. Outsiders, Carter was chosen by Democrats, and he was from Georgia, and this appealed to many in the South as well that would typically be Republican. And then the OPEC embargo, they wanted solutions. What did Carter do in his administration? Obviously, that picture is not when he was president. That is now, because he's still alive as of 2022. He tried to fix stagflation, but was not successful. Gives Penn and Mall their canal back. He makes the Camp David Accords to fix tensions between Israel and Egypt. The grain deal and SALT II were ended. Well, SALT II was never passed after the 1979 Afghanistan invasion by the USSR. And then there was an Iranian hostage crisis began. So maybe Carter did some successful things. The Camp David Accords are what he's often credited with the most. But the last two things really smudged his reputation, and he would not win the next election. So I will talk about why. Right now, 1980s, also to 1992. Conservatism, the new right. We talked about the new left. What about the new right? Many of the following, moral majority, which were Christians that definitely did not like abortions, and then some Christians, well, ties into that, Jerry Falwell, were mad about Roe versus Wade, counterculture, drug use, government involvement, and government scandals, and all the new things. They didn't like new things. They're like, all these new things, they're causing problems. And they really thought that the United States was on a terrible path. That's what they thought. Result, Ronald Reagan. So, because of this growing conservatism in the United States, and many not supporting the past four presidencies, Ronald Reagan, a neoconservative, won the 1980 election. They see what happened with Lyndon Johnson, Tonka Bay, no one had Richard Nixon, Watergate, no. And then Gerald Ford excused Nixon, and then Jimmy Carter, stagflation issues and Iranian hostage crisis at his feet. And so after 4 years of a Democrat that seemed to have failed to many, they chose the new Republican who promised to fix the problem that they didn't like. Reagan's initial issue, what did he have to deal with at first? See, he didn't know at first. Whatever. He had to deal with stagflation since the 1970s. He had to deal with foreign issues, and he had to deal with government growth. What did he do? Reaganomics. This was supply side economics, which was the opposite of Keynesian, I don't know if I'm saying that right, which we already learned about. And so he tried to cut taxes for the rich. Rich don't have to pay as much taxes or corporations, and they cut government spending and less government regulation. This is pretty much reverse progressivism almost. Labor unions. Reagan had to deal with many strikes. A major one being Patco August 3rd strike resulted in him firing many of the employees of this air traffic control. Supreme Court. Reagan appoints many new justices, one that he promised to appoint a woman, and he did, which was Sandra Day O'Connor. And she's still alive today. That's why I put that thing there. She's 91 right now, at least. Won't be in 2 months, less than 2 months. Reduced government. Major change to regulation after decades of the opposite. Foreign policy. What foreign policy did he do? Well, this is kind of the opposite of what other past presidents did. He expanded the Navy. The SDI was created, a weapon to shoot down satellite, or never mind, a satellite that could shoot down things that were threats. And then there was involvement in Grenada and involvement for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which resisted against the USSR. They gave them supplies. This was considered another proxy war. 1984 election. This was Reagan versus Mondale. Geraldine Ferraro was the first woman in her place, which was the vice president of Mondale. Jesse Jackson was the first African-American, or one of the first to run. And those two people, I just named them because that is a major thing in history, but they ended up not winning. But this was a major win for Reagan, the biggest in history. Not exaggerating, in history. That if you see the map, every state is red except for Minnesota, and it's hard believable. It's close to being on the red side. So this is a major win. This shows the new conservatism. What did he do in his second term? Well, to some, not as successful. Deficit grew due to military spending, and the national debt increased a lot. The Iran-Contra affair, this was supporting Contras, which were rebels in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas, which were communists. But the Contras weren't necessarily the best types of people, but they were able to support them by sales to Iran. Reagan was not supposed to do this. If you know the Constitution, not allowed to do it. And reportedly did not remember doing this. And some say it could be due to his Alzheimer's. So, yeah. He may have not actually remembered that he did. Okay, Gorbachev, the ender of the Cold War, as some call. And he's still alive today, too. He was the new leader, Mikhail, I think that's how you say his first name, Gorbachev. He adopted glasnost and perestroika and open-minded reforming of the government. So they're like, oh, let's change some things. And many communist satellites began to rebel. And Gorbachev had to leave the office in 1991, and the Cold War essentially ended with that. Still alive today. That's what he looked like when he was leader there, and then that's what he looks like now. George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush passed away in 2019. So, but he was alive. But anyways, what did he do? Because obviously Reagan is not president anymore after 1988. Can't because of a certain amendment. What did he do? Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. It prevented discrimination between or for Americans with mental or physical disabilities. Water bills projects, these were projects in the West to improve those situations. And then Minority Scholarship Challenge tried to give scholarships to minorities. Bush had to raise taxes even though he didn't want to. He said he wouldn't, but yet. Question and answer. How did the United States regain its swagger? I did not name this question. In the 1981 to 1993 time period. Answer, example answer. So essentially the question is asking, swagger just means maybe respect for the United States, respect and strength. The United States regained its swagger largely by focusing on foreign policy once again. At the beginning of the Cold War, the United States involved itself in many foreign affairs such as the proxy wars of Korea and Vietnam. However, in the 1970s, Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter helped to limit foreign action by negotiation and appeasement, such as in the SALT I Treaty or the Helsinki Accords. To many, this meant a sign of weakness of the United States and meant losing its swagger. Consequently, through foreign involvement of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush in the 1981 to 1993 time period, and supporting the Contras in Nicaragua and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the United States could once again be seen as a powerful nation and regain its so-called swagger. Good luck on your test. Good luck. Thanks for watching.